Well, I'm Sue Quincy, and I'm with the DEEP, and we'll be hosting this year's Envirothon here at the Kellogg Environmental Center in Derby. And this is a final webinar that we offered to help answer some of the questions people might have developed over time and to really focus on how to prepare the presentation for the current topic of climate change and how that presentation might go for students. So I'm going to do a quick recap, starting with the presentation that we did at Goodwin, looking at that information as it was laid out in how you would possibly prepare your team's presentation for this year as well. So I'm going to do my screen share here and we will get going looking at some of those topics. And hopefully the timing that was originally set is not going to be happening and we're back to clicking on things. But we're looking at getting everything together and being prepared for that special topic presentation. And I'm starting here with this slide, which might look familiar from last time that we were together looking at our webinar and doing trainings, as it's laid out in a couple of units that parallel with how we're setting up the scenario this year. And one looks at framing the issue, identifying local impacts, and then your proposed action and outcomes. So when your students are starting to put together their scenario and how they're going to be coming up with the challenge and the solutions, one way is to look at this flow of information. And what we're looking for is how are your students looking at the topic and do they demonstrate an understanding of not just the concept of global warming and climate impacts, but also how they are going to be applying and how they came to their decisions to apply their solutions and their actions. So the first area is framing that issue. And we are looking for students to connect to the big picture. So understanding and demonstrate an understanding of the question on global warming and climate issues. How is it created? What is the problem at hand? What is the science behind that problem? And how do we know about that? This portion really should not take a large part of the presentation. It should demonstrate that they understand the terms that are being asked of them, and it should demonstrate that they understand how it's being impacted by the greenhouse gases that are being added by human activity and compared to the natural behavior of the atmosphere as a greenhouse. And then how that buildup is actually impacting our climate and our systems here on the Earth. Once they've explained the background and what's the issue behind these problems, we then want them to bring it to a more local area. So the transition between the two is when they'd be using that En-ROADS model. By using the En-ROADS model, we're looking to see that they are going to demonstrate what the problem is and then bring it to the local impact by specifying what they would be finding in our own areas here in Connecticut. So you can use graphics at any time, and they can be commonly known, they can be ones that are generated themselves, but they should be clear and easily understood when they're using this framing. When they're using the En-ROADS model, this is something that they're going to do prior to the competition so that they can see what their solutions are going to have. They don't have to have a lot of information on this, but we do want to see what their scenario ends up. So when they've done their scenario test and they've come to that 2.0 goal, it would be best if they took a picture of their simulator and it would have the levers in the position of how they're addressing it. And then in their presentation, reflect in a very brief summary as to this is what's our goal is to meet the 2 or below by 2100. And these are the areas that we're focusing in, identifying the levers that they've moved and why they chose to move those levers. That way, when they bring in this picture, which they can take a picture of their final decision right from the website and save it as a PDF, then we have an idea of what thought went into their plan. So if they've set up this type of an image, and they say that they've focused heavily on energy efficiency in buildings and industry, that's where they're going to now focus on the local aspect of Connecticut. Where does that interest lie, and how is it being reflected in things we're seeing here in Connecticut? So they might be talking about the plans to make appliances and homes and things more electrified, the need to make houses more efficient and tighter so that they can conserve energy. The talking about increased heat and cooling within urban areas. Whatever their topic is, it should relate to where their areas of actions and concerns are. When they're talking about Connecticut, it's very good to talk about what is specifically being seen here, as well as what are some of the graphics that demonstrate some of these issues. So you can definitely use the CIRCA information, the CIRCA website, to find some of those graphics. You can use NOAA and NASA, all have local areas as well. And I believe the Yale Climate Communication site has some very good graphics that demonstrate specific needs for Connecticut. And then we're going into that third area of the scenario and the challenge, and that's looking at actions. That's where the scenario directly applies to how you are going to ask for your proposal as a team coming in. And one big area of that is looking at that equity. In this year's scenario, part of what is required when you go into the information on the DEEP website about the climate change funds and resiliency funding program is that 40% must be utilized in underserved areas and underserved communities. So that's a primary interest when addressing all of these climate actions. And that's because on a global scale, climate change is impacting communities, countries, and groups in unequal ways. And some of those at highest risk are actually contributing the least to the climate issue. And that's why we have to look at how are we going to be making sure those who are in most need or having difficulty in finding solutions have their needs met on a local level here in Connecticut. So that is one area that we are asking students to really focus on, and that's why we brought in the flower framework for this. So when students are evaluating and presenting to these judges about the area that they're going to be taking the action, and they're explaining to us as a DEP group that would be possibly giving them the funds to do this action, they have to be able to explain what will the outcome be and why and how are you using that action and those funds. So if you're not familiar with the flower, there is a lot of background information that we can provide to you, but also that is available that students can easily access and figure out how they're going to apply this flower to their project. So at this point, I am going to end the show here, and we're going to go specifically to this flower area. And let's go here. Okay, and this is where you'll find the answers and how to do some of this activity and what flower actually is. By using the graphic of the flower and by applying the colors and the areas of impact, it helps students illustrate what are the co-benefits to their climate action. And that's an area that is very important when we're trying to look at how we are going to implement climate and climate action. because it allows us to address some of those problems that have been ongoing. And those ongoing problems, such as access to clean water, um, access to waste removal, improved energy efficiency, and improved housing conditions and things like that, and food security, have been compounded by the added stress of climate indicators and climate impacts. And so we want those people to get the relief, and we want people to buy into understanding climate actions. But it's sometimes very hard if you are looking for basic needs. And so if we can have actions that address these basic needs and these ongoing problems, it makes it easier for people to understand and to support why we are putting this new change into our systems. So with flour, it's a long-term solution with a whole system involved into it. And the flour is designed so that it addresses some of those equity areas and ongoing concerns. Everyone's concerned about finding jobs. We are also equally concerned about resilience and making communities livable, the use of energy and ability for people to get around, food and water. Climate is a very large driving force right now. Biodiversity and maintaining habitat and improving habitat, as well as human health, are all petals that bring together and should be focused around the action. But do keep in mind that just by doing one thing does not mean all of these petals will be met. And when we're judging, it also will be understood by the judge that if your team comes in and you have only 3 petals that have been addressed and the others have not, does not diminish the impact or the presentation. It just says that your group has evaluated your actions, and not only will it definitely, I assume everyone will have the yellow petal colored in, so it will address the climate protection, but it also will address resiliency. It might address a couple other things. But really, to think that one activity or one action is going to benefit all of these sectors, that's not believable. But we would like to think it's going to. But if it only really addresses a couple of them, that's fine. The strength in the presentation is going to be really driven by the students identifying what's our problem and what are they going to be doing to address the problem for climate, while it also addresses other needs. If it only addresses climate, that's fine. But we have to make sure that we try and find more solutions that address the larger selection of problems and have those co-benefits. So I do encourage your students and you as coaches to take the time in prepping and evaluating what are we choosing as our implementation, and how can that implementation then be possibly expanded if it's not going to be helping address some of these multi-factors. So this is just the tool that is used by students to evaluate their projects, and then they can go in and start to solve some of those questions and see where they could actually make improvements, which will only strengthen their presentations. So on the Climate Institute website, you can go into the climate resilience section, and you can see some examples that they have. So for let's see, let's choose this project. This gives a nice summary, and it might be something that will help guide your students in preparing their presentation. Your presentations are limited to 9 minutes, and 9 minutes can be an eternity if you're underprepared, and it can be just a microsecond of time if you have too much. So the balance is trying to find the specific points, language to present your case. So in making your case, so to speak, looking at how these summaries are written can help frame how your students might be identifying and organizing their thoughts. One thing for sure is to scale down, and you can see their flowers. And these are the areas that their flowers are addressing. So in this case, this is the Baltimore Edible Orchards. And this was the project in which they went into urban spaces, and they were existing parks, but also they could help establish parks and public spaces for planting of trees. And it wasn't just trees that were there for cooling effect, which is the main thing when we're looking at climate, is that trees do help conserve carbon dioxide. So it's a sequestration. It also provides cooling when we're looking at those heat islands in an urban setting, but also by selecting fruit trees, these also expanded the capacity to provide resources to the public. So they went in and identified specific trees and groups that would help maintain these trees. So in thinking this project of we want to plant trees to improve carbon sequestration and reduce climate impacts, they are also doing the co-benefit of providing food access, because now you can have people go in on their own. They could eat the fruits that are available. They could possibly collect the fruits that are available for personal use, but you can have partners that would then be identified to go in as well and harvest some of those and go into soup kitchens and use them, or in cooking or preparation. They could do food storage. They can also do divisions up to their clientele so that people can have take home and access to fresh produce. It provided jobs because it would give job training, because you would need people and groups that would be able to take care of the trees, now making them available through training to be employed by parks or by groups that would then be contracted to come in and maintain those areas. You also have health and well-being, which is in a general sense that you are providing green space. Green space provides for healthy living, emotional stress reduction, and recreational opportunities. It's providing connection in that it brings people together. It's in the park setting. It allows people to have places that they may picnic under. It maybe allow people to just have access to shade, and it's a meeting spot for other groups to provide for volunteer connections. In side benefit, it does help with energy and mobility, in that in a shorter distance, people can have access to fresh produce. They could have access to cooling station that would be outdoors in case of heat stress, that there is shade available. But also in resilience, you're providing more green space, which allows water that might be coming from extreme weather to infiltrate into the ground because you've opened it up. It's not concrete. You've provided for the grass. You've provided the root structure that is going to maintain soil, and you're providing the actual benefit of climate impact reduction by absorbing and sequestering carbon. So that's what that one activity that is thought of as a climate change activity has a co-benefit, which directly benefits the people involved with it. So by using this flower, they do have all the petals colored in, but they've identified specifically what is being benefited on the side. You've also got some illustrations over here, which relate to the UNESCO benefits and focus areas. So there's the resiliency actions, and then there's climate benefits. So that's what we're looking for, is whatever action your students might be looking at and working on as their project that they would be presenting, evaluate what else is going to benefit in that area. This also requires the students to look at and say, in this project, how are we going to be providing service to underserved communities? Are we working with a partnership? Are we working going to represent a stakeholder group that's from a stressed organization or a stressed location? So that helps set up their presentation. And there's a couple of ways that, if you're not familiar, how you can possibly do the scenarios is I can send you a copy like this. And I can give you a link to this as well. I think I copied the link. And I'm going to go into the chat and see if I can actually message this to my Google Docs, which I will send to you. And that will take you to a huge list of these flowers, all with identified possible scenarios. So let me see if that's this one. Okay, now if you can let me know, are you seeing on my screen the flower pages that are here in multiple? Kelsey, can you come on and let me know what you're seeing on the screen? Okay. Okay, so Amanda, thank you for answering. Everybody is seeing this. So this is what your students can actually use, is this Google slide setup. You can pick any one of these scenarios if you want to do a test run. Earlier, I did this suggestion of an activity is if you're putting in bike lanes into low-income neighborhoods, and how you can evaluate this scenario applied to that co-benefit. So here's our connection, is our bike lanes. And within our connection, I've colored in health and well-being. And that's because obviously they're good. It allows people to bike, which allows people to have exercise, stress release, and it improves the well-being of the communities. And that's a solid dark color that has been added. In this one, jobs and livelihood, it's a lighter one in that it by having bike lanes, you do increase access to other positions. It gives people a way who may not have cars access by bike to get to workstations. It's an easier pathway in which they can travel. And so because it's a little less, it doesn't guarantee that people will be traveling to their jobs, but it does give an added benefit of increased employment for people who are in construction. So you will be designing and building more of these bike lanes. So I put this in as a lighter one in that it's not exactly as strong. And by doing this, this is how you would go in, is you would color it. And once you highlight that area, you're able to do your drop down for your fill, and you can select the color that you're going to be putting in. I used one of the gradient ones. But in the discussion, students might go back and forth and say, you know, I think that's really a high rate. And especially if we have used tech schools, or if we involve job training applications so people can come involved in understanding and being now employable within construction fields, you could just go ahead and decide to make that a solid color if that's a stronger standpoint. If the group decides it's not the strongest, then go in and use a gradient, which is a little lighter. In resilience, bike lanes are great for resilience because it allows people to have access in areas that are not going to be adding into the carbon base. It allows people to have mobility that in case areas do get slightly flooded, that we have areas for people to get out and that type of mobility. In energy, it's definitely a saving of energy because you do not have to have any type of fuel source except people power. and it increases mobility within communities. And then, of course, the climate protection. So in this type of scenario, I did not color in biodiversity. It's not exactly working at increasing habitats. It's not improving or strengthening habitats. So I did not put that in. And food and water, I myself did not color it in, but it could be argued that potentially if you write up in your scenario that your bike lanes will take more of the urban community and connect them to grocery store sections, which are on the fringe of the urban sector, or bringing in closer travel so that people can have access to better food systems, then you could definitely go in and color that as well. So once the discussion has been done, then your students can take this, they can make a copy of the slide and then plop it into their presentation. So when you're putting it into your presentation, you can then crop it to fit whatever. So if you don't want like the top half to show, that's fine. And it would just, you don't want this logo to show, you can crop that out. But the flower does have to be in the presentation on a slide at some point. It can be a slide of its own, or going back to the multi-solving program here, you might have a slide that has it up here in the corner. So if you have a picture of illustrating the activity that you want to implement, or if you have a map of the town, or if you have a graphic or something like that saying why you're going to be doing this activity, do put the flower in and have the ability of the students to identify what are those co-benefits and what petals they are addressing, because that is an important component for that. It's also especially important to remind you that, remember, 40% of whatever is being asked must be in an underserved community, or it benefit underserved communities. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little more information about the flower program, and you can go into, let's just end with this, including that in your presentations. Okay, so when putting together, it is key to look specifically at the rubric. The rubric, when you're looking at it, will also provide you with an idea of how the weighting is going to be, looking at those different areas. And you'll notice the framing the issue, there's the heaviest weight is not put on explaining how climate change and global warming are coming about. So keep in mind that that should be a quick part of your 9-minute presentation when you're dividing out the duties and things. The real information is understanding what are some of the actions, what is being done here locally, what are we seeing, and then why and what are we going to be doing about that. So those are our areas of interest that we are specifically looking at. And at this point, I'm going to take a breath and see if anyone has questions to ask or need clarification in general on things that you're looking at, or on anything specific related to the flower or to your presentation rules and things. Are there any questions or any discussions?
Unmute. Hello.
Hi.
Yes, we're up at Houstonic. A student just asked, basically, you just showed us a bunch of templates of solutions. I don't know how many there were there, but there were at least
there's a lot.
a dozen. They might use one of those actual solutions, or you want them to come up with their own?
Oh, you can come up with your own. Through the process of researching and using the resources that are identified for you, your scenario might be totally different than any of those suggested. that template is just for students to work with, to get used to looking at some ideas that other towns and possibilities of other groups and organizations actually have put into action. But also it's just to get them used to and to provide their own flour. So do you have an idea of what they might be thinking of?
We're still working on our thoughts for it, but we
Okay.
just wondering that particular piece. I see
Mhm.
Sister Irene has some questions.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I think Sister asked if more than one action can be utilized. You can. It gets complicated when doing that type of presentation, because if your team comes up with two things they are asking funding for, then it really has to identify and be very good at focusing the priorities. So if they want to do two or more, I would say to really look at those and prioritize them, so that you would say you're asking for funds to do this activity within this community, and it may have two action steps. So I would frame it as that you're trying to do, one action first, and it would be followed with the supporting action. Otherwise, I would kind of lean you to getting each team have one action is really the easiest way to make the presentation, because it narrows the focus on what you're asking for and what you're going to be doing. There is part of the requirement when asking for the scenario and you're before the board, your action not only is asking for the immediate funding from our climate and resilience funds, but also you have to demonstrate how you're going to link it to longer existing funds, which is looking at that sustainability. And I am going to do a quick here. Hopefully I lost it. I was going to bring up DEEP, the resilience. Here, I can do it through the scenario. If you have your scenario, I'm going to do my share again. We're going to take a look at that scenario itself. So here's your task. Right here is the link that takes you to the actual Climate Resilience Fund website. And that helps explain the criteria, because that's what your group is doing. You are going to represent a group or community of stakeholders. So you have to first be able to tell me, what group are you? You could be, the grassroots organization for resilient food access, or you could be a neighborhood improvement and community awareness, in which you want your community to increase gardening in order to open up green space. So, what community stakeholder are you going to be doing? And then it can be on any scale. You might be working in a large municipality if you're saying you want to improve your parks, and you're the city of Canterbury, and you're coming to improve parks and access to your open space by creating a partnership with Norwich, which would be your underserved community, something like that. And that's your action. And so what you're going to be doing is providing low impact recreational access lines or something like that, that would allow people to improve parks in their area, as well as come out to your area, whichever you want to come up with. But there again, it has to be at least 40% targeted for vulnerable populations. This is what your presentation is asked to do, is stakeholder, how does it fit into global climate change goals? So that's where you're going to refer back to your En-ROADS solution, and you can find, hey, this is the solution we were going to look at. We were looking at improving energy efficiency in houses, and that's going to conserve and reduce greenhouse gases for the global fit. And we're going to go into our communities and go door to door and trying to get people to have an energy audit for their homes. So that's why is that important to be seen in Connecticut? Why is energy efficiency important here? And so you might then want to explain, it is definitely going to work here because we're switching over to electricity. We want to make our homes as tight as possible so cooling and air and heat are not lost. That type of scenario, referring to those climate impacts. So when you're saying you might do 2 activities at once, that's where focusing on one makes it much cleaner for this presentation. And then looking at that future grant. When you go to the DEP website, it lists some of those future connections that your students can look at. So if you're looking for energy audits and sustainability and improved electric efficiency in homes, it has there the different connections of additional funding past this one-time ask for federal funding. And that's a key component, is that it has to be sustainable and connected with some of these federal funds. Okay, I see a couple of questions. One is, please explain what stakeholders are. And a stakeholder is a group of people that have an interest in taking action. So when you're looking at stakeholders in terms of like water user stakeholders, agriculture, business, industry, residents, recreational groups, those are all stakeholders in how we use that water in your community. So when we're looking at stakeholders for climate action, it can be civic organizations, it can be municipal organizations such as Parks and Rec, your health department, it could be association of nurses and doctors, it can be your PTA is another association who wants to do school improvements. It can be the United Sports and recreational groups because they're working within hot conditions. We need to have improved conditions for students who are interested in summer sports or winter sports, things like that. So a stakeholder group is what organization is asking for funding in this case. Let's see, other ones. Do the 3 parts have to be in order you presented them? Not necessarily. That is the order in which the rubric is arranged. If it makes sense for you to create your presentation in a different flow, that's fine. And we can find that within the, judging confines. That's not a problem. David asked, is the presentation 9 minutes or 9 to 11 minutes? It is 9 to 11 minutes is the plan. 9 minutes is the perfection. Okay, so last I heard is that they generally do not look for presentations to go longer than 9 minutes. And then your follow-up is solution doesn't impact underserved people more than it would be the general population. Will there be deduction of points? Not necessarily. When you say it doesn't impact underserved people more than it would the general population, all things will, it refers back to this graphic. And let me get get this graphic back for you to help. Everybody is going to benefit from an action. The key thing is that a lot of actions benefit certain groups and have easy access to those groups. So if the action is to increase the use of electric vehicles, that's great if you can afford a vehicle. And so by putting in car charging stations in commuter lots, you're providing a benefit that will help improve air quality for all, but we're still not helping others in order to get better access to vehicles or to employment. So if you have employment opportunities, then people can go up and possibly purchase a car. So if we're saying we're going to subsidize and put a large amount of effort into subsidizing electric vehicles and purchasing of electric vehicles, that really benefits a specific socioeconomic group. And it's not of benefit to a large majority of people in our state. And so you get very little buy-in for that. However, if you say you're doing electric vehicles and you're going to be looking at how to improve electric vehicle access in urban areas, starting with electric shuttle buses or electric buses in general, then that not only improves air quality, it also improves urban heat climates, and you improve air quality within the urban setting, which is already at highest problems, especially in heat and humidity, which is what our climate is growing in. So that's why you really want to look at how are you going to focus it on those underserved populations that have difficulty making access to these. So supplementing the switch over to electric appliances, if that's an action, how are you going to assist those who have problems and are in rentals and have very little control about which appliance they get? What would be possible to make that an easier switch and an easier lift? And that's addressing that equity issue, which is sometimes an afterthought, and we're asking it to be a before thought as part of the plan. Does that help answer that, David?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. Okay, let me see if there's other questions. Oh, Sister Irene is asking if can a timer be used? A timer is used, and it's used by the judges. So during the presentation, there is a warning time. So when you have like 2 or 3 minutes left, the judge or the timer, in that case, the timer will have a sign that will go up saying, 3 minutes, and that allows people to then regulate the speed at which they're presenting. The key part to presenting is if the more you can run your practice session with the time element in place and someone doing a 3-minute or 2-minute cue will help keep students on board as to how they're framing the information. Because what you don't want to have happen is if that little sign goes up for 2 minutes, it's going to be, you will get that instant panic feeling and you'll start to try and flip through really fast on things. And so you don't want to say, oh, I'm running out of time, and so we want to get to. Just make it part of your natural flow. And the more times you can practice it with the time aspect, your flow will get very clear, and you'll have their confidence in order to present it clearly. But yes, a timer is used. The students will not have a timer of their own to use. It's done within the judges. And let's see. Have I missed any questions? Or has anything else come up in people's minds?
Can you share out the presentation in the morning or Kelsey?
Yes. Yeah.
Look at that
Yay.
covert yes.
Great. Thank you.
No problem. It might not be closed captioned by tomorrow.
Oh, that'll work. Okay.
Cool.
Mhm. Because it is the Connecticut Envirothon, and we're focused mainly on local impact. So it's totally the reverse of think global and act local in this regard. Here is what we're trying to do, is addressing that larger picture. Does anybody have any questions about the scenarios they're thinking of doing? I know I had gotten a couple of people send in and ask if like public health was a possibility to address, or if solar panels for a certain location. Oh, let me do, it is important that during the presentation, you cannot identify your school or where you're from. So when you're taking on the role of a stakeholder, you can be generic. You don't have to be, from that town, your town. It doesn't have to say we're doing it in Oxford and you guys are from Oxford. You can choose anywhere in the state you want to be from, and whatever stakeholder group you want to be, you can make that up. So that is totally anonymous. So you don't want to say that, we're from, Pomfret and we're going to be working within our town and working within the city of Hartford. Be kind of nebulous as to that, so that we don't know where you're from.
Thank you so much for meeting with us.
Sure. And in the scenario, there's those links, the link that'll take you to the DEP website. Go and look and see what is it that the grant, what are those funds asking for? If you were an actual group coming before DEP to get these funds, you can just go ahead and look at the application and work your way through. Don't worry and get tied up in budget, but do, have an idea of a number that you would be asking, because that helps us in looking at your scenario. Is what money are you asking for? And it tells you in the write-up, it's between $300,000 and $700,000. So, but you don't have to do a budget. Don't worry about, don't get tied up in all of that deep water. But definitely, take a look at it and see what are some of the areas that you can address. And if you have any questions, you can always email me at susan.quincy@ct.gov. Okay, well, if no one has any other questions or things they want to clarify, I thank you very much for popping in today. And if you need any additional links or resources, feel free to ask. All righty. Thank you very much and have a really good rest of your week.